listen to as well, and we understand that it's time away from his time here. He's here on his own duties and in his own vouliers, and that's why we thank him. And hopefully, everything that he has to say tonight to us, and all the questions that we ask, will be spiritually beneficial for all of us. I'm not going to say much. That's all I had to say, to thank him. And we ask him to keep us in his prayers and his blessings there at the monastery, and the rest he can say to us.
Oh, okay, we don't say any prayer. We'll sit there. I wasn't too sure what I should speak about tonight, but since I'd already spoken to a few people, and since I see that a few people are following around, and as I was thinking, I think anyone who's entered a church, an Orthodox church, when you look around you see many, many saints. And I think that the saints that have lived in our times, at least the ones that are very close to us, we have a close relationship with, simply because of the fact they're so close to us. And so I thought, as I was thinking about what I should say, my mind came across a certain father that perhaps some of you have heard of, some of you may have not heard of. So I thought perhaps we'll speak a bit about his life, and then we'll open it up and you can ask any question. I wanted to speak about a very holy man that lived a few years ago, in the same, if you want to say, age as the elder Paisios and elder Porphyrios, as you probably already know. And the father's name is Father Iakovos. Father Iakovos is from the island of Evia. He was born in Asia Minor in the 1920s, and like many others, and like Father Paisios also, he was forced to leave his hometown, his village of Farakla, of Livesi, in Asia Minor. Farakla is actually, Livesi is where ancient Myra are. So anyone who knows anything about St. Nicholas of Myra, it's in the same area. It's right opposite the roads. So he was forced to leave there as a small child with his holy mother and his grandmother. They left, they went to the main port of Piraeus, and it's there for the first time that the Greeks of Asia Minor heard the Greeks of the mainland swearing and blaspheming. And when they had heard this, I say this simply because to show us what sort of people lived in Asia Minor. They were great believers, and it was how can I say? They had a whole lot more faith than the Greeks of the mainland. When they went to the port of Piraeus, they were forced to strip down, to clean down, based on the various sicknesses of the day. And they heard for the first time the Greeks of the port swearing and blaspheming. And the small Iakovos remembers his grandmother and mother saying, "It's better for us to be killed by the Turks back in Asia Minor rather than for us to hear these words." They left from there and they were taken to a very small island, the island of Evia, at a poor village, in the village of Farakla, and it's there where the elder Iakovos, or the small Iakovos, spent his first years. He only went to school, he only went to primary school, and when he finished primary school, his father took him and he said to him, Iakovos, we cannot afford you to go any further than this. You have to come with me to learn the trade of a builder so that we can support the family. And so the small Iakovos leaves school and he tags along with his father and learns the trade of a builder. It's at this age, at the age of 10 or 11, that the small Yakovos started to see or notice a few things about his mother. His mother was a very holy lady. The fathers say that holy parents make holy children, and this is also true. His mother was an ascetic, and his mother lived a life of prayer that was hidden to many. What she would do was she would put them to sleep. People would sleep a whole lot earlier than today. They would sleep at 8 and 9 o'clock and not later. She would put them to sleep, and then at 10 o'clock, when she thought that everyone was sleeping, she would get up and she would pray. And her prayer would last for 2-3 hours. And the small Yakovos would see her many times, and he would say, "Why is my mother going through so much? Why is she pushing herself so much? Why does she pray so much?" And what happened once was he saw his mother in light. And being very simple that he was, he went up to his mother and he asked her, he said, "Mum," he said, why is it when you pray at night there is a light around you?" To show the spiritual level of his mother, and to also show the spiritual level of the small Yakovos. The fathers say that when someone sees something like this, regardless if it's not in themselves, they have reached already a very high spiritual level. His mother, of course, did not see any of this, did not see any light. And this is also from God, that many times when we progress in the church, when we progress spiritually, God does not allow us to see the level that we're at, simply because so we don't fall into any pride, and simply so we don't lose that which we've gained. So the small Yakovos starts to mimic his mother. Many people ask me, "Father, how can I help so-and-so? How can I help someone who isn't Orthodox? How can I help?" And the best way is to simply be that what we should be, that is true Christians. Speaking to people many times simply does not help. But being Christians and living a life of a Christian, a person grows and is in a state so they can help someone else. And so the small Yaakov starts to mimic his mother. He starts to mimic her life of prayer. He starts to mimic her many prostrations that she did, up until the age where he was 14 or 15. And he thought, since he didn't want anyone to know about this, he started to leave his household at night. And he used to walk quite a few kilometers in the forest in the middle of nowhere. And he used to go to a church of Ayia Paraskevi, which was a small, what we call in Greece, exoklisi, which is just a little church in the middle of nowhere. So if you can imagine a young boy at the age of 12, 13, 14, leaving his home, walking in the forest with no lights, going to the church so that he can pray at night. These excursions, if I can call that, many times are gifted, and God gives a lot of grace. It's one of the reasons why we as monks pray at night and not during the day. And once, when he was leaving the small church after his night prayer, he saw a lady sitting under a tree right opposite the church. And he was surprised to see her there. And he went up to her and he said to her, "My good lady," he said, "who are you?" And she said to him, I am Saint Paraskevi. Please ask, the Lord has sent me to ask you what you wish." And being very simple that he was, he turned around to her and said, "Is it okay if I ask my mother?" He wasn't sure what exactly to ask. And she looked at him and she said, "Yes, of course." And so we see at the age of even a very, very young man, a very young boy, how clean he was to see the saint and for the saint to appear to him and to ask him, basically to ask a gift from Christ that Christ would then give it to him. And he went to his mother and he told his mother this story, and his mother at first told him off for having the dolmi, the tharos, how do you say tharos? The bravery, the courage, sorry. The courage to actually leave at night and to go out into the forest to the small church. She then thought about it and she said, if this is true and if she appears again, tell her to give you a heavenly gift. You see here that his mother was not interested in money, was not interested in any glory, but wanted her children simply to be saved. And so the small Yakovos does obedience to his mother. He goes back to the church, and after his prayers again at night, he sees the saint again at the same place he saw her, and he raises his hands just like his mother had said to him. And he says to her, my mother said, if you could give me a heavenly gift. And Saint Paraskevi basically said to him that which would occur in the rest of his life. That he would become famous in the end of his life, that he would have a hard life, that many would come to him, both the leaders of the land and the leaders of the church, which exactly as she said to him, it occurred, that he would build a monastery, that he would become a monk, and a few other things that we'll speak about. It's at this age that he also started performing his first miracles. Being very, very young and being very, very simple, the people of the village saw in him a very holy person. Even the priest of the village, they used to call him Father Yakovos. Father Yakovos, even though he was just a young man, he wasn't even a priest. Even the priest of the village called him Father Yakovos. And it's a bit funny here because when the priest, this is one of the many miracles that he had performed, through the grace of God, of course. When the priest's wife could not bear birth, when she was trying to have a child, and she couldn't, the child wouldn't be born, and the priest called small Yakovos for him to come and read a prayer, like he would in many other cases. And the humorous thing about this was, being very simple, he didn't have many prayers to read. Like someone would ask him to read a prayer of health for someone, and he didn't have that prayer. He would have a prayer for, like the priests have, the entrance into a new home. And so he would simply read that prayer, and whatever he read would stick, so the person would get well. And all the people of the village knew this. They didn't have doctors. Doctors didn't exist in the villages back then, especially in Greece. For a person who was sick, the priest was the doctor. And if the priest was a priest, his blessing stuck, and the people got well. This is part of the prophetic and the gifts that are given to priests. And this gift was given to the young Yakovos. Father Yakovos, like they called him, but he was simply a young man. And so the priest calls Father Yakovos so that he can say a prayer so that his wife can bear a child. These are one of the many miracles that he had performed. Growing up, he went to the army. Going to the army, he, like most other soldiers who lived the spiritual life, most of the soldiers, or many of the soldiers, would make fun of him. They would also call him Father Yakovos. He never judged anyone. He tried to help everyone, and he loved everyone. And just to show what sort of a person he was, this is a person who lived, his whole life was a life of prayer. And to see how much of a sacrifice and how much he loved the person next to him, how much he would sacrifice his own time for the other person. During Great Lent, it was Holy Week, and his officer in charge said to him, his officer in charge knew what the young Yakovos was, and he saw that he would become a monk. And he said to him, "Look, Yakov, go. You've got Holy Week off. You have Pascha off. You can go to the church and pray for us." So you can imagine his great joy, Father Yakovos' great joy, in the fact that he was allowed to go to church. It was very difficult for them to go to church during these times. He was in the army for 3 or 4 years. It was a very hard time in Greece then. And what happened was he saw one of his co-soldiers sitting down, and he was upset. And being the person he was, and always looking after the other and for the other, he went up to me and he said, what's wrong? And he said, Yaakov, he said, you'll be fine, you'll be going to your churches, you have your leave, you'll be spending Holy Week, you'll be spending Pascha, and you'll be doing your monk-like things. What am I going to do? He said, my fiancée is in a town far from me, I haven't seen her. And Father Yaakov said, well, if you like, I will give you my leave, and so you can go and see your fiancée, and so that you can go to the services. This is quite a big sacrifice for someone that lives for the services of the church, especially for someone like Father Yaakov that lives simply to pray. So he asked him how many days he wanted, and to cut the story short, he basically took his whole leave. So he took all of Holy Week and he took Pascha. And so we have Father Yaakov, who was still a soldier back then, and he's sitting in the, the army's shelter, the Skopja. Watchtower. The watchtower. I'm glad someone's here who knows the Greek. He was sitting in the watchtower, and the bells rang. And when the bell had rang, he understood that the priest had said, the Christ is risen. And someone asked him, they said to him, Yerunda, after many years when he became a priest, they said, Yerunda, what happened that night? What did you do? And he said, when I heard the bell ring, he said, I knew that the priest had said the Christ is risen, and I said within myself, glory to your resurrection, O Christ. And he said a few Jesus prayers. And then he turned around and said to someone, do you know what happened that night? When I was saying, glory to your resurrection, O Christ, this light came and covered me. This is a big lesson for us. It shows us that Christ gives us his grace there where he wills, and that sacrificing our love and time for someone else, even for those things that we might think are important, for a person that lives in the church, going to church, going to the service is very important. And yet Father Yaakov has sacrificed all this, and God gave him not just the light that we have during Pascha, that we all come with our candles and light our lights, but he actually showed him the uncreated light, and you can imagine what he felt and saw. This was one of the one of the virtues of Father Yaakov, that he would never put himself first, and of all the saints, and he would put the other first, and the more we put the other first and not ourselves, the more God's grace comes. After his service, he went to a monastery that was in Evia, in his hometown. He didn't choose the most spiritual monastery. He didn't choose the most spiritual abbot. He went to a monastery near him. He went to a monastery that had basically 3 monks that unfortunately would scandalize him more than what they would help him. And here again it shows God's will, because the person that opened the door for him was Saint David, who was the patron saint of the monastery. Saint David, after his mother, was to become his second elder, and he would see him constantly. Throughout the many years they lived in the monastery, he was his spiritual guide. There where we don't have any human help, and where human help doesn't exist, God gives us help in his own way. So this person opens the door of the monastery that he thought was one of the fathers, and he only realized that it was Saint David when he went to venerate the icon of the church. When he saw the icon, he realized that the person who had opened the door for him was the saint himself. There is a lot that we can say. I'll only say a few things. A bishop that is still living now had met Father Yaakov, and I want to say a few of his experiences when he had gone. This bishop was a young man. He was studying law. and he had heard about Father Yakovos. He goes to see Father Yakovos, and when he entered the monastery, his first impression wasn't very good. There was only 2-3 people, there were only 2-3 monks, there were 2-3 elderly at the front of the church and no one else. And he was thinking, where have I come to spend Pascha? He stays at the monastery, and after the first night he went to see the elder Yakovos. And the elder asked him, "What's your name, young man?" "Τι το όνομά σου?" And the then bishop, his name was Omiro. So the then bishop started saying his weaknesses, his passions, his various thoughts that he had as being a young man. And as he had started, the elder asked him again, "Can you tell me what your name is?" And he said, "Father, I told you my name is Omiros." And he continues his confession. And after a bit, the elder asks again, "Are you sure your name is Omiros?" And he said to him, "Elder, my name is Omiros." And the elder turns around and he says to him, "But my child, I see another name." And he then goes on to explain how this young man got his name and how his name was actually wrong. The bishop, whose name was Omiros, was born in Cyprus, and his grandmother wanted to give him his name. His grandmother's name was Mirofora. And because his grandmother could not find the male of Mirofora, the male of Mirofora is Mirona in Greek. And through the pressure, so that she doesn't lose the name, someone else jumps in and gives another name, she gave him the name Omiros, which was the name of the priest's son in the village not far from them. And the elder saw all of this. He saw the fact that he got the wrong name. He saw the fact that he should have been given another name. And he said this to the person he was confessing. And he said to Omiros, he said, "Omiro, my child, during your baptism, they gave you the wrong name. But even this name you will not hold for long." And he said to him, "Elder, I've come for confession. I said to you my name. You told me the name I was supposed to have, and now I'm going to be changing names." Anyway, he finished off his confession, and as soon as he finished off, when he put the stole, the petrachili on the young man Omiros' head to read the prayer, he said the prayer "Και αφίονται τις αμαρτίες του δούλου του Θεού Νεόφυτος." The prayers of the servant of God are forgiven, Neophytos. He didn't call him by his name that he told him, he said another name, Neophytos. And Omiro, who was the young man, said Omiro, and the elder said, "Oh, sorry, Omiro." So he corrected himself. This young Omiros went to the monastery many times. And the elder, many times when he would call him, he would say, Neophyte, he would call him by the name Neophytos, and then correct himself. Many years had passed after this. The young Omiros studied theology after this. He went to Cyprus and he wanted to become a monk. He met his elder, which is a long story. I'm not going to say everything here. And he asked when he was about to become a monk, they changed our names as monks. So that just like Christ changed the name of his apostles so that they could start a new life. His elder said to him, "What name should we give you?" And because young Omiros had a great love for Saint Arsenios, the new Saint Arsenios, he said to him, "Elder, I want the name Arsenios." And his elder said to him, "Look, the name Arsenios is an ascetic name. Ascetics take that to live out in the caves and in the monasteries. We're monks in the world. I'm going to give you a name that everyone knows in Cyprus. I'm going to call you Neophytos." This is one of the many gifts that it's very hard for us to understand, and it also explains a bit of the way that the saints actually see us. The saints do not see us like the saint does not see a person and just the present state of the person. He sees his past, he sees his future, he also sees many other things about his life. The same bishop says another story about himself. which I think is touching. I think we should maybe touch on. The bishop, when he was young, when he was the age of 12, he lost his father. So he's lost his father at a young age. And then at the age of 12, they lost their homeland of Cyprus when the Turks invaded, of course. And a week after the invasion and after the war, Omiros's older brother, who was 10 years older than him, and who took basically the role of a father model within a family, dies in a car accident. So we have this young man that's growing up and it's holding all this pain and all this anger within him. What I didn't say was that when Father Yakovos first saw him, he didn't look into his face, he looked at his heart. And he said to him, τι θυμός είναι κρυμμένος εκεί μέσα. He said, oh my, he said, what anger is hidden inside your heart? And he broke down and he said to him, Elder, you would probably be angry too if that which I'd gone through, you'd gone through. And he said a few things to him about his father, about his brother, why did God have to take my brother? He was the person who was who took the role of my father, why did I have to lose both of them? And the elder turned around and said to him, my child, he said, for every pain and every cross that we go through, there's a reason behind this that many times we don't understand and we don't see. And he said to him, I will pray to God, and if God enlightens me, I will tell you. So, the young Omiros, of course, left, and after a while, a person who was studying at the same monastery as this young Omiros goes to see Father Yakovos for confession. And when Father had heard that he was studying at the same monastery, he said to him, do you know Omiros, the tall Cypriot? The bishop's very tall, he's almost 2 meters in. Do you know Omiros at the monastery? And he goes, Father, of course I do. He said, can you please tell him to come as soon as possible? So not the young bishop, the then student Omiros runs to the monastery, which was quite far away. And as soon as he enters the confessional, Father Yakovos looks at him and says, he looks at him and says, Omire, did your brother fall in love with a Jewish girl? And Omiros said to him, Father, he said, before the accident of my brother, I remember my brother speaking to my mother and saying the following. What had happened? Omiros's brother, Petro, had gone to Jerusalem and fallen in love with a girl. The girl was a Jewish girl. And he wanted to take his mother and his brother to Jerusalem. When he came back to Cyprus, he said to his mother, Mama, he said, I fixed things with the young Jewish girl. We will go to Jerusalem. We will take small Omiro to study there. They have very good schools there. And you will have your churches there and everything will be fine. And his mother, when she heard this, she said, my child, she said, if we go to Jerusalem, I will go to church, but you and your brother, you'll be lost, she said, inside so many strangers. And she said, no, I wish for us to stay here. And Petro, his brother, had said, Mama, he said, okay, we'll speak about it later. He gets in the car, he leaves, he crashes and dies. The elder turns around and says to him, Omire, this is of course something that he never knew. He said, Omire, your brother did not fall in love with just some Jewish girl. He fell in love with the rabbi's daughter. And if you had gone there, both you and your brother would have been lost within the strangers there, and your mother would have withered away, seeing both of you being lost. So this, we see how the saints see us, and we see that behind each pain in our life, there are many times reasons which we don't understand. Look, I don't think, maybe I shouldn't say too much. I think you may have already heard about the elder's life. I can't say many more of his miracles, but perhaps we should just stop here and open things up. Perhaps you want to ask something, and we'll take things from there. No one's got any questions about anything? Yes. Sorry, can you speak up a bit? Yes.
Is the life that you live, it's a very, the life you live, because you guys have got to meet day by day, by living a spiritual life, through fasting and prayer, it brings you closer to God, you feel that God has, there's a special connection when you reach that level, you live that kind of life, on that purpose.
In the church, we don't do anything to feel anything. In the church, we enter the church so that we can come closer to Christ. Whatever we do in the church has that end. How do we soften our hearts so that we can accept God's grace? This is a bit of a mystery, and it's not something that we go, it's not something which is ethical, it's not something that we go, oh, I feel well, I'm feeling nice, this is good. I think it's the same as someone who's living out in the world. We enter the church is the hospital, and the church is the means for us to be saved, for us to be enlightened. And the church has the means of taking the wolf and to make it a lamb. And without too many philosophies, without too many, without thinking about where we are or where we are now or what we're doing, but simply living in the church, God's grace comes. And a person's enlightened and he becomes holy within the church without even realizing it. And this is probably the best way. So, living in the monastery is simply an extension of living in the church. Living in the monastery is the continuation of what the apostles lived in the very first church, where everything was common, where our life revolves around prayer. But we don't do, again, we don't do this. I don't know if I've understood your question. Did you ask the question about how we should be feeling? Is that the... Rather in the world. Okay, now I've understood the question, I think. The church has two roads, we say. Okay. These are both means, these are both ways to the same end. The end is Christ. During the service of a person getting married, the service starts with the first words of the Holy Liturgy. Evloyimeni Ivasilia, blessed is the kingdom of the Father and the Son and the Spirit. During our service at Toncha, it starts with exactly the same words. Evloyimeni Ivasilia to Patros to Pneumatos. It's like it's saying to us that what you're doing here starts here but does not end here. It ends in heaven. Our goal always is Christ. Everything else we do, whether that's fasting, whether that's prayer, that's not, they're just the means to the end. So we have two paths, or two main paths within the church, if I can say. and a person simply chooses, there that fits him. It's not to say that, one path's better than the other. Maybe we could say something like this, but they both means to the same end. So it's not so important which path we take. It's important that we're in the church and we live in the church. If it's a calling for someone, we believe that it's a calling for a person to devote his life to God, like the priesthood is, like monasticism is. And a person becomes a monk, not in the monastery, but even outside the monastery. If you see most people's lives that are monks now, if you ever looked at their life beforehand, their life was a life of prayer, a life of church, and a life of work, and that's it. So in the monastery it's exactly the same. Many people ask, and they say, how does a person know if monasticism is for him or for her? And there's got very simple ways to actually test this. One is if a person wishes to have someone else in their life. And another is if they wish to have children. If those two have if someone's closed the door on those two, then basically the scales have already been tipped. It's not for everyone. And our life, as I said before, is a life, it's fairly hard. it's not easy. And it's not for everyone, but for those who it's meant to be, that we feel like our place is there. If I was born again, I would become a monk. I'd become a monk a whole lot earlier than what I did become a monk. It's very hard to explain to someone. The only sort of explanation I can say is, like a person falls in love with a girl and wants to get married with her, and he forgets his, let's say his parents and his brothers and sisters. Not forgets them, but the love of them is, the love of this girl is overcome, the love of his parents. It's the same sort of thing. So I think it's more important for us to be in the church and to struggle in the church, because we're sanctified in the church. And then if someone's got this calling, you'll see that within you. A person will see that within themselves. It's not for everyone. Does that sort of answer your question?
What are the difficulties of being a monk?
These are personal questions. The difficulties of being a monk. The difficulties of being a monk is cutting your wheel, the same way as within marriage I think it's cutting your wheel. Isn't that right? Isn't it like marriage, we're supposed to cut each other's wheel? Isn't that our main difficulty? Because they're our main passions. Most of the passions stem from our ego anyway, and most of our problems stem from our ego. Everything else is easy for us. People come and they see the long services, and they see, our life looks very mundane to an outsider, but that's actually good for us. It helps us a lot. It helps us to close in on what the things are important and not to have our mind on other things elsewhere. But even that's easy. If a person comes with the right thoughts, then monastic life is a life of great joy. Of course, we have to humble the passions, especially our ego. And if we don't do that, of course, things will be hard. But they're two separate crosses. You pick a cross and you take one. So whether that's a cross in married life and out in the world, or whether it's a cross in monasticism, they're both crosses, and they both have the same end. But to answer Father's question, yes, I think the hardest thing is cutting our will. And it's funny because we tie ourselves many times to things that are superficial and unimportant. And although we leave the greater things, we get tied to smaller things, and they're the things that tie us down to the world. You may reading the Fathers, reading various things. You may read some stories and you may think, that's really harsh and it's really funny. Why are they so stern and why are they so... Everything's got a reason behind this. And of course the obedience that we do would be a whole lot, a spiritual father out in the world wouldn't say anything the same as what perhaps an elder would say within the monastery. Because what the fathers know is it's our will that actually cuts off God's, it's our will, it's our ego, which is the one thing that cuts off God's grace. When we go to the monastery, the fathers keep saying to us, "Kalesi pomoneski, kalesi pakoes." Good, is patience the right word? I don't know if patience is the right word. Kali pomonim, kalesi pomoneski, kalesi pakoes. Good obediences and good... It's a slow process, it's a learning process for all of us. But it does have a lot of grace. And it's also very hard. I remember one story, St. Isaac says this story. He speaks about a monk that for 30 years his life in the monastery was hell. It was probably hell because of his own ego, but that's another. He says for 30 years he passed through it was very, very hard for him. And then one night he spent a night in prayer, and after this night in prayer he said, if I was to pass another 30 years simply to reach this night of prayer, I would do it with great joy. A lot of times we have to suffer and we go through pain and we don't realise that, this is the way that we will be humbled, this is the way that, not that God wants, God doesn't want this. We've put ourselves in a ditch many times, we have to pull ourselves out. But this is the way that we're healed. And it's a great, great mystery. And we see this in many, many saints' lives. That although they thought they were by themselves many times, suddenly they realised that the path that they were on, even though it was very, very difficult, they see Christ in front of them. When they do see Him, then everything But we have to wait, we have to be patient, and we have to simply struggle. With no big philosophies, many people have asked me these days, how should we struggle, what should we do? I think it's important. I think when most of you come to church, and this is the same as what I was saying the other day at one of the other meetings that we did. I think there's got a few things that are important for us. If I can just change a bit now that I'm thinking about this part, that can perhaps help all of us. Like, what's the one thing that we do in the monastery? If someone comes to the monastery and they see the externals, they will see us. It's a very boring life, but as far as someone will see, but it helps a lot. And what helps us a lot is the following: it's the program. A program in a spiritual life is very, very important. Just like you have a program here, and you come and you do your services, which is very good. And I was happy to see that you even chant in English. It's the first time I heard a service in English today. All of this helps. And what helps us even more is for us to have a program at home, a program of prayer at home, morning and evening, so that we can fill our life with prayer. And it's not just the Sunday and the Sunday that we go to church. The Sunday that we go to church, the Father says, is like an absolute minimum. That's our sindirisi. That simply holds us. So a person's life in a monastery doesn't differ, coming back to the question again, it doesn't differ much from a person who is struggling out in the world. It's just that in the monastery, things that are a whole lot more, both a whole lot more condensed, and the time is a whole lot more. We spend a whole lot more time doing things in the monastery, mainly because we have the time.
And one of the things that to me is that I'm a very colourful person in every aspect of my life. And for me, I have this insatiable urge to create something. And I'm in little bits from changing my hair colour to making things, to paint my nails, to something. And it's an insatiable urge I have. Is that a bad passion to have?
I think if I don't want to give you an answer, a direct answer. Someone asked me once, a while back, I think the last time I was here, Father, is it okay for me to go to a disco or nightclub? And I said, if you can take Christ along with you, go. What's the problem? The problem is that our fallen nature and our passions many times lead us to do things which don't help us. So whatever doesn't help us, we think should be cut away, should be stopped. If it's something that, it depends also how strong we are. If there's got something that does not affect us spiritually, then it's fine for us to do. I think what's important as a Christian, I said a bit about the program. The program's not the most important thing. I think the most important thing was inside the church is if you have a spiritual father. Now, what's the role of a spiritual father? I know that some people have taken this in the wrong way. Spiritual fathers, just like the church, we regard the church as a hospital, and we all come to church because we're sick. The church isn't a club. The church is a hospital, and we're all ill. And we come to the hospital because we're ill so we can get well. And the role of a spiritual father is not to give magical solutions and answers, but to help his spiritual child go from one point to the next point closer to Christ. And then to help him again from that point to the next point. Let me give an example, and maybe that will sort of help. Because we're not always ready to leave, why do we call things passions? Because we're so tied to them that we can't leave them. And we can't leave these things by ourselves. Our fallen nature, St. Paul says this, he says our fallen nature should be more inclined to do the bad than we are to do something which is good. It doesn't mean that what we're doing is good though. So how does a spiritual father help? A spiritual father takes us from here and he brings us one step closer. That step is not perfection, it's not here. It's simply one step closer. He brings us a bit at a time. And we're not always ready to hear what is correct either. We spoke about the elder Yakovos a bit. A good friend of mine who has now passed away was very close to the elder Paisos, Saint Paisos, and he had asked him a question once. And like in a conversation, we usually change topics, and we change the conversation, or the topic changes. And he asked him a question, and he didn't get the answer. And within the space of 3 years, he saw him many times within this space. And then one good morning, after 3 years had passed, when he went to the Yoranda, he went to the elder, and he said to him, do you remember this? And he gave him his answer, or an answer. It was something personal. My friend was a bit taken aback. He said, my Yoranda, he said, I asked you this 3 years ago. And he turned around and said, you weren't ready for this answer back then. Sometimes we have to grow a bit so that we're ready to take the next step. We're all at different levels. So we go to a spiritual father and we tell him our pains, we tell him our passions, we tell him our things. And with God's enlightenment, I think, he gives us, the first step. And we should take that first step and take things from there, and then take things slowly. I'm not saying that what we have in us is either good or bad. if we do things for Christ's love and we do it for our fellow person's love, then it's most probably good. I think many times we have to be careful. So I can't give you an answer if this is right and wrong, but what I can say, like I say to most people, is it's good to have a spiritual father in our lives. And he's the one that can kind of give, because he'll know us then, we can open our heart to him. He'll give us the agoye, the way to progress slowly. If I can give an example for myself, and perhaps I shouldn't do this, but it may help. I had an issue when I was younger, and I went to my spiritual father, and he said to me, look, it was the fasting period, like the fasting period is coming up now for us. And he said to me, look, if you can, try not to eat meat. A bit of time had passed from there, and then he said to me, look, stop eating milk products. Some more months passed, then he said to me, stop the oil. So the fast, this was about fasting, and it was only about one thing, but I want to speak about this. And then he said to me, stop the oil. And then after a few months he said, well, you're going to fast now on Monday also. Because he knew that I was going to become a monk, I said this to him. He said, if you want to become a monk, you start from now. So we have the same spiritual father giving me a different piece of advice at a different stage in my life. And this is where a spiritual father can help. Because it's not always easy for us to leave those things that we're tied to. That's why we call them many times passions. It's like something that I know, something that may be wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong in this case for yourself, of course. We may be tied to something so much that it's very difficult for us to. But I think behind all these things, if we pray about these things, and if we pray for God's help, because we haven't got the strength to do it ourselves, God's grace will come in. God's waiting for us to open up to Him. There's nothing magical about this. We have to open up to one person comes to church and he's got a glass, the other person's got a jug, the other person's got a whole tank. It just depends. Each person comes in, the other person comes and he's got nothing. It depends how we come to the church to receive God's grace. It's not God's grace which is the problem, it's our heart and it's the way that we open up. So I think that's probably the best answer I can give. And it's not so much that, God's given us many gifts, like you said, and many people have many gifts. And if we use those gifts for the glory of God and for the help of the others, then that's good. But many times we're blinded because we don't see further down the track. And this is the danger. And this is why a spiritual father can help so much. Because it's like you're going to a doctor. We go to the doctor, why? Because the doctor knows 5 things, well not 5 things, a whole lot more things better than us. So you go to the doctor and you tell him, look, my hand's sore, and he sees your hand and he says, your hand may be sore, but it's not your hand, it's your back. It's your nerves in your, I don't know, like a phenix or like we're saying, some other area of your body. These are the same sorts of problems, the same sorts of issues. The spiritual father won't look at the face value, but he'll look at what we call in Greek the aitio, what's the reason. And we try to heal the reason. Once the reason is healed, once the root is healed, then the passions go. In the monastery, we don't just confess our sins, we actually confess our thoughts, which is something very hard to do out in the world also. Why do we do that? Because we cannot discern within ourselves what thoughts are ours and what thoughts are sent by a demon. The fathers say that our fascination is the bridge that the demons use so that they can bother us. And because we can't discern the thoughts, what is mine and what isn't mine, we confess everything. Those things and it could be something that looks good, and this is the problem. This is what the devil does always. He makes something look good. And that's when we fall for the trap. That's when we fall most of the times. He'll give us, I can't give He basically gives us excuses for things. A person, I got the question, if we can finish off here. As people, and you'll see this within yourself, we always excuse that which we do, always. This is also part of our fallen nature. If you ever look at your actions, even if you do something good or bad, like someone will come up to you and will, swear at you in the face, or will say something bad at you, and you will say something bad at them, and then you'll excuse yourself. You'll say, "Oh, I said this to them because they upset me, and it was right for me to do this." And I ask you a question: is it right to react that way? I don't know if you've understood. Maybe I haven't explained it properly. There's got a lot of ways. I'll step back a bit. There's got a lot of ways that we can react to something. Someone comes and he swears at me, and I can hit him back. Someone swears at me, and I can swear back at him. Someone swears at me, and I can get upset, but not say anything. Someone swears at me, and I can simply become upset because he swore at me, because I was the reason. These are different spiritual levels. And we react a lot of times, or most of the times, based on our passions. And this is also the problem. Many times we do things and we think about things and we think that we're perfectly in the right, and yet, as Christians, we're not. Being a Christian many times is a bit of, Christ says what? Christ says if someone slaps you, hits you on one cheek, go and turn the other cheek. And that's like, for the world, that's like foolishness. But it's through this love and it's through these actions that we help the other to be saved. And this is why the first apostles, who were a handful of people, changed the whole world without even lifting their finger. And we're so many million Orthodox and we can't even change ourselves nor the person next to us because we're not true Christians. They sacrificed themselves, they sacrificed their love, they sacrificed even their lives so the next person can live. They did what Christ said, "I die so that you can live." So I think the best thing to do is, if we have a spiritual father in our life, someone who we can open up our heart to, and he will help us take that step at a time. And it's not a thing to say that, the gifts that are given by God, many gifts are given to us by God. We just have to move them in the right direction. You know what sin in the church, you know what amartia means? Amartia means we've missed the mark. All of these things that we have within us, even the passions many times are just the energies that God has given us that we have lost our direction. And so we have to find our path. And when we come to Christ, these things are healed, slowly. And then we can hear it, we can clear out. We may not be able to do it now, but down the road we may look back and we say, "Oh, look, I used to do this, how silly was it, how foolish was it?" And that's how we grow. So I think, I don't want to give you any, because I don't like giving any personal answers, because I think it's very wrong. I think it's good if we have, since we come to church, I think it's good if we find a spiritual father and have a spiritual father in our life. It's very important. It's at the same level, for me, it's at the same level, for many of us, it's at the same level as going to church. It's that important. Because we all fall, we all have weaknesses, and what's the one thing that separates us from Christ? What's the one thing that Christ cannot commune with? And that's our sin. Once the sin has gone, that's when God's grace can come. And a person who has confessed before in his life will feel this also. So I don't know if that helps. At the back there. First off, is it okay if I speak in English? Because there may be some who can't understand the Greek. Είναι εντάξει να μιλήσω στα... I think that we shouldn't look at others at all. I think the problems most of the time, 99% of the time, is inside ourselves. How can we help the others? How can we help ourselves? If we look back and we see why do we get upset, why do we get angry, that will answer our question. We get angry mainly because we've got a lot of egoism, a lot of pride. Who are you to say this to me? Whereas if we were humble, we'd probably say, you're right, and you can probably say a whole lot more also. I think again, if we remain in the church, if we live in the church, if we pray, if we confess, because behind all these sins, the more we confess these sins, the more their bond on us is loosened. Και πρέπει να περιμένουμε. God's graces are magical, and I think it's good for us to see our weaknesses. It's good for us to fall. Our failures can be a success for us if we use them properly. To see our weaknesses is very good. To look within ourselves and to see what we truly are, which is probably the hardest thing. Father asked, what's the hardest thing in a monastery? One of the hardest things is just that, looking within yourself and not looking at the other person. The cause, most of the times, is within ourselves. It's not the other person who's at fault. He's just igniting what's already inside ourselves. So he's given you, anyone, if you get upset at someone by yelling at you, he's simply showing you what's inside yourself. It's not his fault. And this is good to see this. It's good to see that we get upset. It's good to see that we get angry. It's good that we fall and we yell, because then we can then look back and say, look, I fell, I was wrong, I was in the wrong. And that's when we have to humble ourselves and go and ask for forgiveness, because it's not just from God that we ask forgiveness for our sins. We also have to ask forgiveness of those who we've faulted, or even someone else who has, for example, something against us. And then you'll feel within yourself, even if you're not at fault. If you are not at fault and you go ask someone, please forgive me because I upset you, even that opens up the way for someone to also malakus. What happens most of the times is something happens and we react by our passions, and this is the problem, not as Christians, we think we're Christians, but we react with our passions και αντιστοιχόμαστε ανθρώπινα, so to say, and we attack them like they're attacking us, and then we think that we're okay, and yet we're not. Θέλει υπομονή, θέλει προσευχή, θέλει εξομολόγηση, and if you ask me about humility, if we pray to God for humility, what usually happens is God sends us someone who will humble us. This isn't any theories here. God will send you someone to yell at you, to scream at you when it's not your fault, so they humble themselves. If this is what you want. It's good to see our faults. This is the way that we learn. And for us to know that it's not the other person's fault. The faults are within us. And this is what we see, this is just adding on your point, this is what happens to us in the monastery. You come to the monastery, and because everything external quietens, all of a sudden, everything that's within inside of us comes out. And it's not nice. It's not nice at all, I can say. But it has to happen like that. It has to happen so that we can see what chalya we have. And trust me, we've got a whole lot more chalya than we think we have. There was I don't want to name anyone here. There was someone who was a fairly holy man, and he'd prayed to God for God to show him how he was. And God revealed what he was up until a point. He fell down and he couldn't get up for 2 hours. It's very hard to look into ourselves. It's perhaps one of the hardest things to do, simply because we always excuse ourselves. It's very easy, and it's also very dangerous, and it's also a great sin, because I've seen this in a lot of Christians, and I've stressed this in the last few days that I've spoken to people, to judge. Because what happens is, instead of looking, like what the Father said, automemsia is to look within ourselves in our own sins and faults, we turn our gaze, instead of looking in, we look out. And as soon as we've done that, we've lost the plot, we've lost the road. Sorry, I cannot see you. I cannot see you then.
I'm just curious, like your answer. How do you kill your ego?
With great pain. How do you kill your ego? I don't think kill is the right term. I think what's important is for us to be in the church. The Father say what? Όταν είσαι στην εκκλησία, when we're in the church, it's like entering a stream. When the stream enters, when we enter the stream goes. If we simply remain in the church, we grow in the church, and we become holy, even without realizing it. So I think if a person has a spiritual father and they go to church and they live a life of prayer, they're the basics. We shouldn't philosophize and think about this like too much. And everything happens slowly. Does that? I don't have to. It doesn't answer your question, of course, but it's look. The ego is the root of all of our problems. That's why as monks, as monastics, the first thing they tell us is we basically listen like to whoever the elders say to us. And what that happens without realizing is you slowly get into the habit of listening and obeying, well not obeying, but listen to the other person. And it's the same thing in marriage. This happens in marriage also. The husband to the wife to the husband. To cut each other's will, it helps us progress. Unfortunately, what happens nowadays is we're spoiled from this big, and when you're spoiled from this big, you have a big ego, and the more you grow, the ego just grows. Whereas of old, it wasn't like that, because they had to really work, because they didn't people were a whole lot more humble, and that's why God's grace could work so much more. But I think remaining in the church and having a spiritual father, they're the main things, and then from there on, slowly. And we will see the things slowly. The ego is the last, it's the last root, but we can't get to that unless we've cleared up a lot of the other major passions first. Pray about it. And God gives us many times, not the way we like it though.
Just three questions that people will ask, and the topics that you send out on. I've heard a lot of answers from people that I've been with. So I was just curious in asking you about the ego thing, maybe I could learn a lot.
No, that's
what
it.
you said. The answer anyway.
I think One of the fathers say that, we monks sleep a lot in church, actually. We shouldn't, but we sleep a lot in church. And there was one abbot that actually said, if you see someone sleeping like in one of their seats, they take the exact same position as a child within its mother's womb. A child within its mother's womb doesn't think, doesn't need to think, doesn't need to say, feed me, I need to breathe now, but simply remains, it sits, and it lives, and it grows. It's the same within the church. We don't need to philosophize a lot about these things a lot of times. But simply going and remaining there and continuing, and there's got a few things, like I said, that can help. Definitely having a spiritual father, that's like compulsory. That's compulsory. I don't like using that word, but that's the only word I can find in English now. Praying at home, having a program, reading, prayer. All these things help. Sorry. Is there a difference?
Is there a difference between confessing to one as to a priest in regards to a different spiritual level, or is that
You mean a priest monk? No, I don't think that's important. I think it's important for a person to find a spiritual father, find a confessor, and then to stick to him. And one of the things I've heard a lot is, we're looking for holy people. It's more important the preparation that a person does so that he goes to confession. That's the most important thing. And God would enlighten, even a simple priest to say that which we need to hear. Most of the times we're fairly, we're not at the level of the saints to have, very minute, detailed work. We're still on the very base things anyway, most of us. So I think that's not so important. It's important to find someone, and once you do, it's like a doctor. You go find your doctor. Once you find your doctor, like you stick to your doctor. And to know that a spiritual father is not, he's not an opponent. He's not there as, your opponent. He's there to help you. And you're not confessing to him anyway. You're confessing because confession for us is a mystery. We're not confessing to the spiritual father, we're confessing to Christ, and Christ already knows what. Like he knows us a whole lot better than us anyway. So the spiritual father's just there to help us. It doesn't matter if he's a priest, monk, or if he's a married priest. Sorry. Yes. How do you find another one, you said? Or what happens, or you're thinking of maybe if you lose your spiritual father, is that?
Yeah, when you have a spiritual father alive and you pass away, how do you know that you can find another one?
You pray. I think it's one of the things we miss out on. We put everything human in, we put all our thinking in, I have to do this, I have to do that, and we leave God out of the picture. I think it's the way that we react many times. Whereas we should start first off with prayer. And look, I think that the fact that we're here and the fact that we have a spiritual father already, God's not going to leave us. Isn't it touching that? What's it that brings a person, even a person who's out in the world and who, for example, doesn't come to church and hasn't got a real relationship with Christ or the church, and we see that Christ goes out and he chases after all of us when we run off from him. So isn't he going to help us when we're trying to find someone so that we can open up to? Mm-hmm. Sorry, I can't hear properly. Are you speaking about the situation in the monastery? Yep.
You're up here.
Yep.
So, how if that person you asked the question for
Yes.
does,
Yeah.
how do you know when the next part? Because they go, that's what, if you still don't think, well, you can learn everything now, but you want to learn more.
It's not a thing of learning.
Like,
Yeah. I think I understood your question. Yeah, I think I understood. It's not a thing of us learning. Being orthodox has got nothing to do with learning. Actually, it's quite the opposite. We don't go to a spiritual father to learn about things, although that may also be a help. We go to a spiritual father to confess our sins, so that the sins can move out of the way, so that Christ's grace can come. And within the monastery, it's exactly the same. If my spiritual father, like my father confessor, my yerunda, my elder in this case, passes away, then we'll pray about it and find someone else. There's always got another person there for us.
the word I should have used was elder.
Sorry?
The word I should have used was elder.
Elder. Yeah, we have elders. In the world you shouldn't have elders. It's quite a different thing. Because the relationship of a monk with his elder is very close, and it's not the same as a spiritual father with his spiritual children out in the world. Maybe that's something which isn't important anyway, but I just stress that. Elder is something which is used, and they use it in a lot of books now, and I know that a lot of people say, oh, my yerunda and my elder and so forth. Elder is something, it's a monastic term. And it's something like an elder would say something to, like my elder would say something to me that he would probably never say to me, for example. Like he would say, I don't want you to wear this rasa again. And you might say that for various reasons. You might say that to see the way that I react. And that's what, a spiritual father out in the world probably wouldn't do this. Well, he wouldn't do this. Because that's not the level that, a person's elder's it's not all that important. I think if we leave things in God's hands, and if we pray about things, God many times show us the person in front of us. He'll put the things in, other doors will close, others will open, and it'll just be like a natural progression, and we'll find, the appropriate person for us. But it's important for us to have someone. And it's not a thing about knowledge. We don't go to someone to give us some knowledge, like some guru or something, I don't know. But a spiritual father is there to help us come one step closer to Christ. Each person's at a different level, and they're there to simply place us, to help us come from here to the next step, and from there to the next step. It's not so much a thing about knowledge. Yep. Oh, sorry. They reposed before our times, but even if we did meet, I think it's very difficult, even if we were to see someone who was holy, I don't think we would recognise. There are many people that met these elders that we spoke about, and the elder Paisius. The elder Paisius was he used to laugh and joke. Many people that used to see him thought, hang on, isn't he supposed to be holy or something? But they hid their virtues in many ways. The saints never called any sort of attention to themselves. And when they saw that people would do this, that's when they would start tholosi kitanera, like they would say. They would start to do various things so that people wouldn't pay attention to them. Like there was a young man that went to Father Paisius, he knocked on the door, and the elder opened up and he said, I want the elder, and he said, he's gone to Carias to buy cigarettes. And it was him. And he said, that's okay, I'll wait for him. And the elder looked at him and said, no, look, I told you he's gone to Carias to buy cigarettes, why have you come here? So they used to say things like that, to see the way people react. We don't, even if we were to see someone many times, it's only when there's a real need. We hear a lot of stories, and I'm pretty sure you heard a lot of stories about these people, and even these things that I said now. the things that they revealed to people because they needed to be said. There was a reason behind this. They weren't fakiri, they just, said things so that people would clap for them, and nothing like that. Orthodoxy is nothing like that. If you were to see Father Paisios, you would have seen a humble monk with schismena rasa, just sitting there, you wouldn't pay attention to him. I know people that met him and didn't pay any attention to him. Because our krisi is, our criteria, krisi, it's seftiki. It's not right. And so we look past these people many times. But that's not important. I've met people who are holy, I believe is holy. They told me exactly what I should know as a monk. Basically, that which they've said to me all my life as a monk, this person said to me. So it's not so important to meet someone who's holy. It's only when someone really needs to hear something that God will enlighten a saint to say it. Most of the times they don't speak. They don't show themselves. And even their life is hidden. There's very few things that we know about their life. And they're at a whole different spiritual level. Father, I don't think we have any more questions. Is that enough? Yes or no? Sorry.
So when John put up this when the Pharisees and Sadducees came, he referred to them as root of vipers and asked them why they were flee from the wrath to come. I was just curious as to why he called them root of vipers.
Because you've looked a whole lot deeper than the external. And sometimes we need to hear, the saints saying they react. They don't react. What we have to understand is the saints don't react by their passions. And everything that they do is out of love. So even that which he said was the truth, of course. But sometimes someone has to be knocked a bit to wake up. I believe that was the reason why. It's I believe the reason why I called them that was this. Sometimes we need to hear ourselves that, but we have to understand that this is it's not done out of anger, it's not done out of, the saints don't react by their passions. Father, do you want to come and end off here? I think everyone's finished. Actually, if I can just, one last thing. Before I came, I went past the monastery of Suroti in Thessaloniki where St. Paisios' tomb is, and I said to the nuns that I was coming to Australia, and when they heard that I was coming, they gave me some icons to give as a blessing to all of you, since St. Paisios also came through here. So if you can all come past and take an icon after we finish off this.
So thank you, thank Father Seraphim for coming, but also giving us the talk, answering your questions, but speaking about Elder Yakovos Pater Rene is one of my personal favourites. I love Elder Yakovos. So it was exciting to me, as many times as I hear his story or see his story, it was just exciting for me to hear about him again and again, his own spiritual struggles, about his mum as well. Such an amazing thing, seeing as a young boy. It's a powerful thing for a child to be seeing their parent, in such an ascetic, ascetic struggle. It reminds me of a story once of an atheist and I'm not sure, I think I heard it from Bishop Athanasio, I don't know if he's the one that was speaking with the atheist, or if it was Saint Paisios that was speaking with the atheist, I can't remember. But his mum was a very, very spiritual woman, a woman of prayer. So every time like he would get up in the middle of the night, he would just see his mum on her knees, and praying. And eventually this boy, he went off like a lot of children do, in their teenage years and whatever, and he became an atheist. And eventually his mum begged him, to go to the Holy Mountain, to Mount Athos, and maybe there, he'd find some faith or whatever. And while he was speaking now with this elder, he goes, I was able to reject everything in life. He goes, all my faith, everything that was taught, everything about God, whatever, I was about to reject. I could reject everything. But there's one image that I cannot forget, and that's the image of my mother on her knees in prayer. He goes, I could never. So it's such a powerful and beautiful thing. And with Elder Yakovos as well, he said about himself, sorry I'm taking over, but that's why I'm excited, I love it, he said that he would die ministering to God, and that's what happened, that's exactly what happened. On the 21st of November, which was the feast of the entrance of the Mother of God in the temple, after the Divine Liturgy, he went to confess someone, and during the sacrament of confession, while he was giving confession, he died then, And Saint Porphyrios, a lot of the people that were going to Saint Porphyrios at the time, everyone knew Saint Porphyrios, and they were going to him, okay? And Saint Porphyrios was saying to them, why are you coming to me when you've got a saint in the world next to you, which was Saint Yakovos, or Elder Yakovos now. We know who is a saint, but not officially proclaimed in the church by a saint, but he was a very saintly person. So I'm very happy that you spoke about the life of Elder Yakovos. We need those examples and those inspirations in our time. Thank you for making the time, to come as well and to be with us. Just the presence of the blessing of the Holy Mountain here with us is enough for us. So thank you, and keep us in your prayers there at the Holy Mountain where you are. Okay. So I'm not going to give the icons out. I'll let Father Seraphim give the icons to you. You can take his blessing as well. And thank you for coming.